Ma'am, stop right there. You can't enter this facility. I don't care what you say, you're not getting through this door.
Sir, I'm Dr. Adrian Cole. I'm the attending trauma surgeon on call tonight. There are patients inside who need me right now.
Step aside. I need you to calm down and show me authorization. I have my hospital ID. I have my badge. I have my surgical credentials on my lanyard. What I do not have is time. People are dying behind that door. Move, doctor. Adrienne Simone Cole had been a trauma surgeon for 14 years. She had trained at Johns Hopkins. She had completed her fellowship at the Mayo Clinic. She had been named Chief of Trauma Surgery at Hargrove Memorial Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina 3 years earlier, the first black woman to hold that position in the hospital's 81-year history. She had performed over 4,000 surgeries. She had been featured in the Charlotte Observer, in the American Journal of Surgery, in a profile piece that ran nationally under the headline, "The Surgeon Who Doesn't Lose." She had never, in 14 years, been prevented from entering her own hospital. Until the night of March 4th, when a multi-vehicle accident on Interstate 485 sent 11 critical patients to Hargrove Memorial's emergency department simultaneously. When every trauma surgeon on staff was being called in from home, and when security contractor Raymond Dollard decided that the black woman in scrubs and a surgical coat running toward the ER entrance at 11:47 p.m. did not look like someone who belonged inside. What happened in the next 19 minutes was captured on Dollard's body camera, on 3 hospital exterior security cameras, on the body camera of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer who responded to Dollard's call, and on the phone of a nursing student named Priya Anand, who was standing outside the entrance on a break and started recording the moment she recognized Dr. Cole and understood what she was watching. Those recordings would eventually be viewed by 94 million people. They would be entered into evidence in a federal lawsuit. And they would result in a $13.8 million verdict that restructured security protocols at hospital systems across the country. Before we go any further, where are you watching from tonight? Hit that subscribe button if you're new here. Stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists, and your support is what makes it possible to keep telling them. Raymond Dollard had been working hospital security for 6 years. The last 2 contracted to Hargrove Memorial through a private security firm called Sentinel Shield Group. He had received standard security training, standard de-escalation certification, and what his contract described as healthcare environment familiarization. What that training had not included, apparently, was any meaningful protocol for identifying medical staff during emergency situations. What it had also not included, based on everything that followed, was any mechanism for examining and correcting the assumptions that Dollard brought with him to every shift. He had been posted at the ER entrance that night because of the mass casualty event. Extra security during high-volume trauma situations was standard Hargrove procedure. His role was to manage civilian traffic, family members, bystanders, media, and ensure that only authorized personnel accessed the emergency department during a critical incident. It was an important role. He performed it that night in a way that would cost Sentinel Shield Group, Hargrove Memorial Hospital, and ultimately their insurance carriers nearly $14 million. The hospital's exterior security camera captured Dr. Cole's arrival at 11:47 p.m. She pulled into the physician parking structure, her vehicle identifiable by the physician parking permit clearly displayed on the dashboard. She moved quickly across the parking structure, through the connector corridor, and emerged at the ER entrance in surgical scrubs. A white coat with her name and credentials embroidered on the chest, Dr. Adrienne Cole, Chief of Trauma Surgery, her hospital ID badge on a lanyard, her surgical cap already on her head. Her phone to her ear as she received a briefing from the charge nurse, inside about the incoming patient status. Dollard stepped in front of her before she reached the door. His body camera activated at 11:43 p.m. It recorded Dr. Cole clearly. The white coat, the embroidered name and title, the hospital ID badge, the surgical credentials on the lanyard, the scrubs. The surgical cap, every visual identifier of a medical professional responding to an emergency, presented simultaneously and unmistakably. Ma'am, stop. This entrance is restricted. Dr. Cole lowered her phone, her surgical briefing interrupted mid-sentence. She looked at Dollard with the expression of a person who has just encountered an obstacle, so unexpected that her brain requires a full second to process it as real. I'm Dr. Cole. I'm the chief of trauma surgery. I'm on call for this mass casualty event. I need to get inside right now. I need to see authorization. She held up her badge. His body camera recorded it clearly, her photograph, her name, her title, the Hargrove Memorial Hospital logo, the chief of trauma surgery designation in bold text below her credentials. This is my authorization. This is my hospital ID. My name is on the front of this building. I have been on staff here for 11 years. There are critical patients inside who need a trauma surgeon, and I am the trauma surgeon. Please step aside. That badge could belong to anyone, Dollard said. I need secondary verification. Priya Anand's phone camera began recording at 11:48:02 p.m. She was a second-year nursing student doing her clinical rotation at Hargrove, standing outside on a 10-minute break, and she recognized Dr. Cole immediately, had attended one of her Grand Rounds presentations 2 months earlier, had pointed her out to fellow students in the cafeteria as one of the surgeons they should aspire to become. She pressed record without hesitating, her hands steady, her nursing instincts already cataloging what she was witnessing as something that needed to be documented. Secondary verification, Dr. Cole repeated, her voice carrying the careful control of a person managing an emotion that could, if released, become something that would be used against her. Sir, I have my hospital ID badge with my photograph and my title. I have my surgical credentials on this lanyard. I have my physician parking permit in my vehicle 10 feet away. I have my name embroidered on this coat. What secondary verification do you require that is more definitive than all of that combined? I need to call it in and get a supervisor to confirm. How long will that take? I'm not sure. Maybe 10, 15 minutes. The hospital's exterior security camera recorded what happened on Dr. Cole's face in that moment. Not an explosion, not a breakdown. Something more controlled, and in some ways more devastating. The expression of a person who has encountered this particular category of obstacle before, who has learned that losing composure makes it worse, and who is doing the precise internal arithmetic of how many minutes she can spend here before the cost becomes measured in human lives. Sir, she said, her voice dropping to the register she used in operating rooms when she needed everyone in the room to understand that what she was about to say was not a suggestion. My name is Dr. Adrian Simon Cole. I am the chief of trauma surgery at this hospital. I trained at Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic. I have performed over 4,000 surgeries in this building. Inside that door right now, there are 11 critical trauma patients from a mass casualty event on I-485. Some of them are going to die if they do not receive surgical intervention in the next several minutes. I am the surgeon who provides that intervention. Every second I stand on this sidewalk talking to you is a second that belongs to one of those patients. I am asking you one more time, clearly and directly, to step aside and let me do my job. Ma'am, I understand you're upset. I am not upset, she said, with a precision that the recording captured like a blade. I am a trauma surgeon who is being prevented from reaching her patients. Those are not the same thing, Dollard called his supervisor. His body camera recorded the call, 40 seconds of hold music, then a brief conversation. Then the supervisor telling him to use his judgment in the field, and that he could let her through if he felt comfortable. He did not feel comfortable. I'm going to need you to wait while I get someone from hospital administration to come down and verify. Hospital administration, Dr. Cole said. Behind her, through the ER's exterior windows, the controlled chaos of a mass casualty response was visible. Gurneys moving, personnel in scrubs running. The particular organized urgency of a trauma team operating at maximum capacity without their chief surgeon. Sir, hospital administration is inside managing a mass casualty event. The person you would call to verify my identity is currently doing my job because I am standing on this sidewalk. She called the charge nurse. His body camera captured her side of the conversation. Marcus, I'm outside. I'm being prevented from entering by security. Can you send someone to the entrance to verify my credentials? A pause. I know, I'm trying. She lowered the phone. My charge nurse is sending someone. It will take approximately 4 minutes because every person in that building is managing a critical patient right now. She waited. His body camera recorded her waiting, Dr. Adrienne Cole, chief of trauma surgery, standing on the sidewalk outside her own emergency room in her surgical scrubs and white coat, watching through the windows as her department operated without her. Her hands clasped in front of her with a stillness that Priya Anand would later describe in her deposition as the most disciplined thing she had ever witnessed. At 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes and 17 seconds after Dollard had first blocked her path, a Charlotte Mecklenburg police officer named Deputy Carl Hutchins arrived. Dollard had called CMPD at 11:49 p.m. Not to report a crime, but to request assistance with what he described on the call recording as an agitated individual attempting to force entry to a restricted medical facility. Hutchins's body camera activated as he stepped out of his patrol vehicle. It recorded the scene, a woman in a surgical coat with Dr. Adrienne Cole, chief of trauma surgery embroidered on the chest, standing calmly on the sidewalk, hospital ID badge visible, surgical credentials on lanyard, surgical cap on head. The controlled expression of a person who is managing an enormous amount with a great deal of discipline. What's the situation? Hutchins asked Dollard. This individual is claiming to be a surgeon and attempting to access the restricted ER entrance. I can't verify her identity. Hutchins looked at Dr. Cole. His body camera recorded his eyes moving from her face to the embroidered coat to the badge to the lanyard to the surgical cap and back to her face. Ma'am, can you tell me what's going on? Officer, my name is Dr. Adrienne Cole. I am the chief of trauma surgery at this hospital. I have been standing on this sidewalk for 5 minutes and 17 seconds while a mass casualty event is occurring inside. I have presented my hospital ID badge, my surgical credentials, my physician parking permit, and my embroidered credentials. I have had my charge nurse call down to verify my identity. I have not raised my voice, made any threatening gesture, or done anything except attempt to enter the hospital where I am the chief surgeon during a mass casualty emergency. She paused. I need to get inside right now. And I need whoever is responsible for this situation to understand that every additional second I spend on this sidewalk has consequences that cannot be recovered. Hutchins looked at Dollard. She has a hospital ID badge. Yes, but with her photo and her name on it. Yes, but I couldn't verify, and her name is on her coat. Dollard said nothing. Hutchins stepped to the side of the entrance. Ma'am, go ahead. Dollard stepped forward. Officer, I haven't completed my verification. Your verification is complete, Hutchins said. His body camera recording his own expression with the particular flatness of a person who has assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion that does not reflect well on everyone present. Let her through. Dr. Cole walked through the door at 11:53 p.m., 6 minutes and 41 seconds after Dollard had first blocked her path. Should anyone, regardless of their credentials, their title, or the embroidered name on their coat, have to stand outside their own workplace while people inside need their help? Drop your answer in the comments, because this was not a story about a security protocol that failed. This was a story about who gets the benefit of the doubt in America, and who has to prove themselves at the door even after they have already proven themselves for 14 years. Inside the emergency department, Dr. Cole scrubbed in within 90 seconds of entry. She performed emergency surgery on 3 patients that night. 2 of them, according to the surgical reports entered into evidence, would not have survived another 15 to 20 minutes without intervention. The attending physician who had been managing the trauma bay in her absence, a second-year trauma resident named Dr. James Park, provided a detailed statement in the subsequent investigation describing the specific clinical deterioration he had observed in those patients during the 6 minutes and 41 seconds. That the chief of trauma surgery had been standing on the sidewalk outside. Those 6 minutes and 41 seconds would become the central exhibit in a federal lawsuit that restructured hospital security protocols across the country. The formal complaint was filed with Hargrove Memorial Hospital's administration the following morning. Dr. Cole arrived at the hospital CEO's office at 7 a.m. 4 hours after she had completed her last surgery of the night, still in her scrubs. With a printed timeline of the previous evening's events and a USB drive containing the exterior security camera, footage that the hospital's own system had captured. She placed both on the CEO's desk and sat down. "I want to tell you what happened last night," she said, "and I want you to tell me why it happened. And then I want to talk about what happens next." The CEO watched the footage. He watched it twice. Then he called the hospital's chief legal officer into the room. Then he called the head of security operations. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Hargrove Memorial's initial response was an internal review, a formal apology from hospital administration, and the suspension of Dollard pending investigation. Sentinel Shield Group, the security contractor, offered a statement expressing regret and noting that the incident did not reflect their training standards. Dr. Cole retained an attorney named Constance Morrow, 31 years of civil rights and medical discrimination litigation, former counsel to the American Medical Association's Equity Division. A woman whose reputation in the Charlotte legal community was built on cases that other attorneys described as unwinnable until she won them. Morrow watched all 4 recordings back to back. She read the surgical reports documenting patient deterioration during the 6 minutes and 41 seconds. She reviewed Dollard's training records, Sentinel Shield's protocols, and Hargrove Memorial's security contractor oversight documents. She sat quietly for a long moment when she finished. "There are 2 things happening in this footage," she told Dr. Cole. "There is a security guard who looked at a black woman in a surgical coat and saw someone who needed to prove herself. And there is a hospital system that contracted a security service without adequate protocols for identifying medical staff during emergencies. Both of those things are actionable. And both of them are going to be very, very expensive." The federal lawsuit was filed in the United States District Court for the Western District of North Carolina. Dr. Adrian Simon Cole versus Hargrove Memorial Hospital, Sentinel Shield Group, and Raymond Dollard individually. The complaint alleged racial discrimination under 42 U.S.C. Section 1981, violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, negligent hiring and supervision by both the hospital and the security contractor, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with medical practice, a count that cited the documented clinical deterioration of 2 patients during the unlawful detention as direct evidence of professional harm caused by the discriminatory act. That final count, tortious interference with medical practice, was the one that made defense attorneys across the country take notice. It was the one that transformed a civil rights case into something that carried implications for every hospital system in America that contracted private security without adequate medical staff. Identification protocols. The county's initial offer, communicated through Hargrove's legal team, was $75,000. Morrow sent back 2 words, "See you." The trial began 16 months later. The courtroom was filled every day. Medical professionals in scrubs and white coats who had taken personal days to attend, civil rights advocates, members of Charlotte's black professional community, medical students and nursing students from programs across the Carolinas, national health equity organizations that had filed amicus briefs supporting the plaintiff, and media from across the country that had covered the case, since Priya Anand's phone footage first went viral and generated 94 million views in 11 days. Priya Anand, by the time of trial, had completed her nursing degree and accepted a position at Hargrove Memorial. She sat in the gallery every day of the trial in her nursing scrubs. The footage was played on the first morning, all 4 recordings simultaneously. The courtroom was silent for the entire 6 minutes and 41 seconds. The jury watched a woman with her name and title embroidered on her coat, her hospital ID badge visible, her surgical credentials on her lanyard, her surgical cap on her head, stand on a sidewalk outside her own emergency room while a security guard called for a supervisor and a police officer was summoned. They watched her face during those 6 minutes, not the explosion of a person who has lost control. but the disciplined stillness of a person who has learned that control is the only tool available to her in moments like this, and who is using it even as the cost of the delay accumulates behind the door she is being prevented from walking through. They watched Officer Hutchins arrive, assess the situation in under 30 seconds, and step aside. They watched the security guard try to object after a police officer had already determined the situation was resolved. 5 jurors were visibly emotional when the footage ended. The others wore the expression of people who have just watched something they knew was real, but had hoped was exaggerated. Dr. Cole testified for 7 hours over 2 days. She described her training, her career, her 14 years at Hargrove Memorial. She described the mass casualty call she had received at 11:31 p.m. The briefing from the charge nurse, the patient count, the severity assessments, the specific clinical details that had told her, before she had even gotten in her car, that this night was going to require everything she had. She described the drive to the hospital, the parking structure, the connector corridor, and the moment she emerged onto the sidewalk and saw Dollard step in front of her. "I knew immediately what was happening," she told the jury, her voice carrying the flat precision of a person recounting something they have had a long time to understand completely. "Not because it had happened to me at that hospital before, but because it had happened to me before, in training programs, in operating rooms where I was mistaken for an orderly, in conferences where I was asked to get coffee, in 14 years of practicing medicine at the highest level this profession offers. There has not been a year, not one, where someone did not look at me and see something other than what I am." She paused. What was different about March 4th was that the cost of what they saw had a number attached to it, a clinical number, a survival probability. And I knew that number was changing every second I stood on that sidewalk. She described scrubbing in. She described the first patient she reached, a 37-year-old construction worker with internal bleeding from a steering column impact. She described the clinical assessment she performed in the first 90 seconds and the decision she made in the second 90 seconds that Dr. Park's documentation indicated the patient would not have survived without. She described it in clinical language, precise and technical, and the jury understood every word of it because Morrow had spent the previous week educating them on trauma surgery timelines. "I saved his life," she said simply, "and I am grateful for that. And I will never stop thinking about the 6 minutes and 41 seconds that I spent on the sidewalk before I was allowed to try." The expert witnesses were comprehensive. A trauma surgery specialist testified about the clinical significance of delayed surgical intervention and provided specific survival probability calculations for the 2 most critical patients during the 6-minute detention period. A hospital security expert testified that Hargrove Memorial's contract with Sentinel Shield Group lacked any protocol for medical staff identification during mass casualty events, a gap that he described as a foundational failure that no adequately managed hospital security operation should contain. A racial bias researcher from Duke University presented a study of hospital security incident reports from 43 facilities nationwide, showing a statistically significant pattern of credential challenges directed disproportionately at Black medical professionals. A medical career specialist calculated the full reputational and professional impact of the incident on Dr. Cole's standing, her speaking engagements, her research collaborations, and her position as a role model for Black women entering surgical medicine. The defense argued that Dollard had been following his training, that the mass casualty situation created genuine security concerns, and that the delay, while regrettable, had been brief and had not resulted in patient death. Morrow addressed each argument in her closing with the methodical precision of a surgeon herself. Raymond Dollard's training, she told the jury, did not include a protocol for identifying medical staff during emergencies. That is Hargrove Memorial's failure and Sentinel Shield's failure, not a defense. It is an admission. She paused, looking at each juror in turn. The mass casualty situation created security concerns, and those concerns were addressed in under 30 seconds by a police officer who looked at the same woman with the same badge, in the same coat, and made the correct assessment immediately. If Officer Hutchins could do it in 30 seconds, Dollard had 6 minutes and 41 seconds more than he needed. Another pause. And the delay was brief. Yes, 6 minutes and 41 seconds. The defense would like you to find that number small. I would like you to consider it from inside an operating room, from inside a chest cavity, from inside the specific arithmetic of a trauma surgeon who knows exactly what 6 minutes and 41 seconds costs a patient with internal bleeding and a dropping pressure. Doctor. Cole knows that arithmetic. She was doing it on the sidewalk. That is what you saw on her face in that footage, not emotion, math. The most terrible kind of math, where the numbers are people. The jury deliberated for 7 days. When they returned, the courtroom was so full that people were standing in the corridor outside. Doctor. Cole sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit, her surgical credentials on the table in front of her, the badge, the lanyard. The embroidered coat folded beside them, placed there at Morrow's suggestion as a quiet, permanent reminder of what the case was about. Liable on all counts, every count, against Hargrove Memorial, against Sentinel Shield Group, against Dollard individually. The sound in the courtroom was not an eruption. It was something more complex, relief and grief and validation mixed together in the particular acoustic signature of people who came to this verdict from very different directions and arrived at the same place. Dr. Cole sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, her eyes bright and dry. Morrow put a hand on her shoulder. Doctor. Cole nodded once, slowly, with the composure of a person who has been waiting a long time to breathe. The damages phase lasted 8 days. $6.2 million in compensatory damages. For reputational harm, emotional distress, the documented professional impact of the incident, and the specific, calculable value of a trauma surgeon's time during a mass casualty event. $4.9 million in punitive damages against Hargrove Memorial for negligent contractor oversight and failure to implement adequate medical staff identification protocols. $2.7 million in punitive damages against Sentinel Shield Group for systemic training failures and inadequate emergency protocols. Total, $13.8 million. The verdict restructured the industry. Dollard was terminated by Sentinel Shield Group within 48 hours. Sentinel Shield Group, facing regulatory pressure from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and the Joint Commission on Hospital Accreditation, announced a complete overhaul of its medical facility security training program, mandatory medical staff identification protocols, emergency credential verification procedures, and an independent bias audit of all security contractor stop patterns at healthcare facilities. Hargrove Memorial, under Joint Commission oversight, implemented what became known in hospital administration circles as the Cole Protocols, a tiered medical staff identification system operational during all mass casualty events, mandatory body camera use by all security personnel, an independent medical staff liaison present at all restricted access points during critical incidents, and quarterly implicit bias training for all security contractors. The protocols were adopted voluntarily by 63 hospital systems in 14 states within 18 months of the verdict. The American College of Surgeons issued a formal statement citing the case as a catalyst for systemic reform and announced a national working group on hospital security equity co-chaired by Dr. Cole. Dr. Cole used a portion of her settlement to establish the Open Door Fund, providing legal resources and professional support to medical professionals who face credential discrimination in clinical settings. She testified before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. She was appointed to the North Carolina Medical Board's Equity and Access Committee. She delivered the keynote address at the American Trauma Society's annual conference, in her surgical coat, her credentials on her lanyard, her hospital ID badge visible. She still works at Hargrove Memorial, still serves as chief of trauma surgery, still parks in the physician structure, and walks through the connector corridor to the ER entrance on her overnight shifts. The entrance now has a dedicated medical staff identification station with a biometric scanner, a direct line to hospital administration, and a security protocol that was written, in part, by the woman who was once made to stand outside it for 6 minutes and 41 seconds while patients waited. Priya Anand works the trauma floor on the night shift. She and Dr. Cole have coffee together sometimes, in the early hours of the morning when the department is quiet. Anand told an interviewer once that the night she pressed record was the night she understood what nursing was really for, not just the clinical care, but the witnessing. The insistence that what is happening is real and that it matters and that someone is watching. I saw Dr. Cole on that sidewalk, she said, and I thought, someone needs to see this. Someone needs to know this happened, she paused. 94 million people saw it. I think that's enough. The footage, all 4 recordings, synchronized and time-stamped, became required training material at hospital security programs, medical school equity courses, and law enforcement healthcare liaison certifications across the country. A 6-minute and 41-second case study in what institutional racism looks like when it is not loud or violent or dramatic, when it is simply a man standing in a doorway, unable to see what is directly in front of him, while the cost accumulates behind the door. In Charlotte and far beyond, Dr. Adrian Cole's case became a landmark, proof that credentials matter, that the cost of bias can be measured in clinical minutes, that institutional racism does not require malice to cause devastation, and that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is stand very still, speak very clearly, and make absolutely certain that what is happening to them is witnessed and remembered, and never, not once, allowed to be forgotten. If you believe that a surgeon's coat should open any door, that the color of someone's skin should never determine whether their credentials are believed, and that 6 minutes and 41 seconds is long enough to change everything, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because tomorrow we have another story where the camera told the truth and the truth changed the outcome. The record is always watching, and the record always wins.